Hello everyone, I hope your vacation is going well and hopefully you have a lot of snow to play in. It is December 19th when I'm recording it, so I'm not quite sure what the weather will be like, but hopefully you had a great holiday. Today's podcast lecture video is about antebellum American art, and so we're going to take a peek at the artists of the time period, look at some of the key characteristics, themes, as well as little tiny things that they often hide in pictures to tell us that they are from the various American schools of the era. So to begin today, we're going to talk a little bit about the themes. One of the first things that we're going to see without a doubt throughout this art is this idea of the undiluted power of nature. More than anything else, we see that painters want to show not only Americans, but also the rest of the world this ideal new Garden of Eden. And so many of the pictures that we're going to look at today will create this idea that it is this beautiful, untamed place that is much like the Garden of Eden. Nature will be therefore a focal point, and it is often grand and awe-inspiring, much like maybe the Ansel Adams black and white photos that many of you have seen throughout your life. We see that nature is going to be viewed as a source of wisdom, something that we can learn from rather than turn away from. And so this idea that came from the earliest colonists that we are going to tame nature and that we are going to control it is something that we're going to see in the 1820s more or less disappears and becomes someplace that we can learn from instead. It also becomes a source of fulfillment where we fulfill the ideas of our country, whether it be the ideas of democracy or the ideas of our thoughts. And we'll see that with some of the movements that come about throughout the course of the next couple of years, I shouldn't say couple of years, but from about 1820 to the 1860s. We also see another theme, which is the transcendentalist ideas. I know a number of you have taken classes with Mr. Zarda that talk about transcendentalism. Your reading and Garrity also has spoken of it. And painting becomes a vehicle, as it says here, through which mankind could reach the minds of other people. Again, you will see as we look at these paintings, the idea of the transcendentalist is going to be very, very important to creating spiritual and, as it says here, moral transformation. We also have a third theme, and this is an interesting theme in some of the pieces that come out of this time period. I never even realized that they were American nationalistic pieces, and they really try to define exactly what it is that America means. What is the concept of democracy? So we'll see some paintings that really do reflect the ideas of Jackson throughout, as well as this idea of wonder and rugged individualism. There are going to be paintings that look at race, specifically blacks, and we'll show racism as well as Native Americans. As I mentioned in one of my classes, there is this concept that the Native Americans as a race will disappear. The Smithsonian will be taking clay masks as natives are put upon reservations because they do feel that the species, if you will, of Native Americans or First Nation people will disappear. We also will see a theme of political extremism, and I don't have as many paintings related to that, but there is going to be that aspect, and perhaps the editorial cartoonist of the time period have a role in that particular theme. And the question of what exactly is the price that we pay for progress? What happens when we bring in factories to an area? What happens to the natural beauty and grandeur of that undiluted power of nature from number one? So typically we see four different genres in American painting. We will see history paintings, of course, highlighting the great deeds of our founding fathers. We will see portraits, which are very common. We'll take a peek at those. We'll also see landscapes, which are simply amazing, and then what are called genre scenes that more or less reflect everyday life. The first and major school of painting in the United States that develops is called historically the Hudson River School. They were based in upstate New York, hence the name Hudson River, and their characteristics often included this grand, amazing scene that just simply seems to go on forever and take your breath away. Oftentimes when we do see humans in the painting itself, they're very, very tiny, almost insignificant. It seems as if nature could easily crush them with the dropping of a boulder. Or again, just the perspective makes humans seem so, so tiny and minuscule. we see some lovely experiments with light on water, and I encourage you to look at how light and water are used in the sky. One of my favorite pieces, and it's not in this PowerPoint, but actually creates using light sky a copy of the American flag with stars and stripes and clouds, and it really is quite amazing. And I never recognized it as a piece from this era. It's used extensively in Walt Disney cartoons, believe it or not, as propaganda during World War II. So mostly because of that experimentation with the light and the water. And I want you to look for the symbol. The symbol is going to be throughout the pictures. I probably won't mention it to the end of each piece, but pretty much every one of these paintings, especially if it's a landscape piece, if they're a Hudson River school member and have learned to paint there, they will have some sort of a broken tree stump in the image. So I encourage you to take a peek at that. Occasionally I'll remember to mention it, at other times I won't. All right, that's about 5 minutes and 30 seconds of boredom. Let the painting images exploration begin. The first piece here by Thomas Doty is quite lovely. As you can see, the use of the insignificant man down here in the bottom center portion of it. We see the use of light and dark, and we see a couple of stumps up here to the side. Again, the grandeur, if you will, of the world seen in this particular picture. I don't have as much to say about this particular piece as I do about some others, but this gives you an idea of some of the basics that we see in nature's wonderland here. And I'm going to try to move this off to the side so it's not fully visible. And let's move on to picture number 2. If we can move forward here, we will see a Frederick Church piece, Niagara Falls. Again, pretty simplistic, but notice the use of the light here. And again, you can almost imagine, if you will, the rainbow that is being formed as the water cascades down from the falls. And this particular piece is by Frederick Church, who is a member of the Hudson Valley School. We do see, look at right there off to the side, that little tiny stump, which is an indicator that he was a member of the Hudson River School. View of the Catskills here off to the side. We see some people, some very insignificant humans down here. And this is going to be Thomas Cole. Thomas Cole is often viewed by many as the father of the Hudson River School. And quite honestly, nobody before Hudson and his group of painters from the school had ever really painted the American landscape in such a way. And oftentimes his paintings are going to focus on the Hudson Valley from the Catskill areas through the Adirondacks. And he is one of them that is going to demonstrate this idea that America is this Garden of Eden. And doesn't that just look like a lovely scene that, you know, I'd love to build a house here and of course spoil the landscape, but nonetheless create a beautiful, beautiful portrait of what the potential of America is. A great piece. Did you notice let me see, go back here. Did you notice on the last one, where was the broken stump? We had a couple of them down here in the corner. So again, very, very common aspect of that school as a symbol. This is a very famous piece, the Mount Holyoke, and there will be at Mount Holyoke eventually a women's seminary. And this too is by Cole, again, the father of the Hudson River School. And we see this is the oxbow and a lovely storm that is coming in, the view and the magnificence that is associated with this particular piece. The dramatic clouds that you see to the left do lead to the idea that this is an uncontrolled power of nature, and that man is pretty much insignificant in that time period. But we also start to see what we call historically a bit of tension between wilderness that we see on the left and this idea of almost gardens. If you look carefully off to the side here, you do start to see that there are lines that are creating fields. And the question becomes, what is the shape of America? Where are we headed? Would the wilderness disappear simply for civilization, or could civilization off to the right here coexist with the wildness of the wilderness? Again, another Thomas Cole piece. I'll be honest, he's one of my favorite painters from the time period. A beautiful piece here, and this is The Course of an Empire. It's a series of paintings that's going to take us through what happens when we have civilization clash or come into contact with the wildness of nature. And so this one is going to be The Savage State. Again, an absolutely lovely painting. It is meant to be part of an allegorical painting series on the rise and fall of civilizations. And to be quite honest, Cole paints this as a warning to Americans about the danger of democracy, and he really thought that democracy, as it was under the Jacksonians, could go ahead and degenerate into mob rule. And what will the mob do? Will they become dictators, and will they take this particular society that you see here that is so pristine and clear, yet very, very um, savage in its nature, and do something else to it? This particular painting is meant to represent the primordial scene, a culture that does not have any records or monuments in it. We do see right down here, there's a man off to the side here that appears to be kind of in a native state, a savage state, holding some sort of a weapon in his hand. Did you find the cut off stump? And we see off to the side here the Native Americans living with their fire in the middle as well. Again, the course of the empire. We move on to the second phase of the empire, which is going to be the Arcadian or pastoral state. In this particular picture, we see the beginnings of architecture off to the side here. You can see that there's obviously a fire in the middle there. We start to see the increase of technology and the arts because of this particular structure and it's the way it is built. We know that the arts have begun, but we realize that with the movement of man and or woman in these particular areas here, that this particular nature state of nature cannot remain. And so this is again meant to represent, think of it if you will, this way, the ideas of Jeffersonians, of the ideal agrarian republic. And this is, I think, what Jefferson pictured us to be, this culture that's going to have its monuments, but that's going to remain, for the most part, rural and adopt to the land rather than conquer the land, if you will. The next slide shows what happens during the course of the creation of that empire. And I think if we really think about this picture, it does reflect what perhaps someone like Alexander Hamilton would have hoped for the United States. You will definitely notice the neoclassical architecture that's off to the side here, which will become very popular during the Federalist era. And of course, that is what Hamilton wanted for us. He wanted us to take a place on the world stage. In this particular thing, we see Caesar, believe it or not, this is the picture of Caesar coming across the bridge. And so there is this fear and almost this warning in this series by Cole that if untamed, if unstopped, I should say, that mob rule could eventually lead to this dictatorship. The next picture shows what is going to happen during the course of this empire that started out at its savage state, and that, of course, reflects back to the idea of destruction. In this little thing, we see that we have very, very angry or bellicose people who have grown up, and that this great imperial city that we looked upon earlier has fallen, and it is basically been sacked and pillaged by hordes of we don't exactly know as we look at the picture, but we realize that with every empire, it does rise and it does fall, and that is the warning that Cole sends out to those who look at his paintings through this allegorical series. The last picture is absolutely gorgeous. I love this. It reminds me of Planet of the Apes, to be honest, and walking upon the beach and seeing the Statue of Liberty coming out of the ground. I know that's weird, but you guys know me and that's the way I am. This one is entitled, as it says here, Desolation. And the desolation is complete, and we see that nature itself is starting to return and to take over the remnants or the leftovers of civilization, and wilderness is once again ruling here. And again, we see a single column left, and perhaps that column comes to symbolize the vanity of man and the things that he has done throughout his life. Notice, if you will, atop the column here, and you may not be aware of this, but there is a stork. And I know this summer when I visited France, they were very proud in Strasbourg of the number of storks who live there. And the stork historically is a symbol of rebirth, and it does hint at in the future that there will be some regeneration of man, that man will not completely be removed from the face of this earth. Again, is that totally not Planet of the Apes? All right, moving on to our next slide. We see Kindred Spirits by Asher Durand. And Asher Durand, let me just find my information on Asher Durand here, is very much one of those artists who hopes to create what is called historically a harmony between man and nature. He views them as being able to live in peaceful coexistence, to use a Cold War term. And he wants to look at how to contemplate or painting nature. Okay, his thoughts are to basically create a painting that is going to bring him closer to the divine and to inspire one to lead a moral life. And he and his friend by the name of William Cullen Bryant are going to disclose the meaning of nature to the riot to the writer here. Um, Durand is going to visit Europe once, and he believes at looking to one's place of birth for inspiration, and that is actually where he was born. And he will be, as well as our last artist, a founding member of the Hudson River School. And again, the Hudson River School is more of an informal organization. It wasn't an actual school where everybody enrolled, but a group of artists studied in this certain area, and they worked together, and basically it was an informal affiliation, and they get to be given the nickname of the Hudson River School. One of the other people who is probably not as popular, well, to me anyway, is going to be John Audubon. I'm sure most of you have heard of the National Audubon Society. And Audubon is going to focus on animals primarily. We see these in front of us are some of his watercolors. And he is considered to be the ornithological art branch of American illustration art. And these come from his actual Birds of America series. What's interesting about Mr. Audubon is that he is not a scientist and really has no formal training in natural history, but ended up being a really wonderful field naturalist. Unfortunately, not such a good thing about him, in order to illustrate the birds that you see in these pictures, and he has hundreds of them, it's a very, very popular book series, he had to kill them in great numbers. So all of the animals that you see pictured here were not from his memory, but he had actually killed them and then placed them in very awkward stances to get the pictures that you see in front of them. And again, this is a paradox of this particular time period. He was a hunter in love with hunting, and but had a respect and even a love for his prey, as shown by these beautiful pictures that you see in front of you right now. We're going to move on to the next group. This is kind of going to be the second generation of what we call the Hudson River School artists. They're called the Luminists. And the Luminists, if I can make my slides move forward here, the Luminists are going to really, really look at water as a basis, hence the luminary concept. It's a very interesting glow. And for them, they're going to use plays of light oftentimes. Water will very often play a central role in their paintings, and many of them live in the area of Boston, and that's where they're going to have their topics set as well. And the reason they set it themselves up in Boston is because many of the merchants who were in Boston had earned lots and lots of money from their trade on the seas, and they wanted to have some sort of permanent record of their ships, and so they painted these authors to create portraits, if you will, of their ships in great details. And the ships, of course, become representative of the American spirit. You'll notice the American flags are prominent in here, almost the only true color besides the blues and the browns that are used for the wharves and the men themselves. And again, a very interesting piece. Robert Salmon, don't know a lot about him except that he's a member of the second set of Hudson River schools. Again, another a piece very similar to the last, just to give you an idea of the use of the light, the luminescence. Caleb Bingham is probably one of the more famous American papers to come out of the Midwest. He is going to be a man who does a wonderful job. Notice the little stump here. So he is a Hudson River School, little stump over here. I love the cat, meow, meow. Notice the luminous aspects of the atmosphere and the use of fog there and the lovely reflection that you see off of that perfectly still water that almost looks like a window pane. So Caleb Bingham is going to be a painter that we look at a couple of other things, I believe, a little bit later in the PowerPoint. Architecturally, we are going to make some changes during this time period, and we are in the era that is called the neoclassical style of ancient Greece and Rome. And you can see this very evidently in the Greek and Roman columns that are so prevalent. If we think back to ancient Greek and Rome, those of you who had Euro and know the understanding and importance of that as even the Renaissance era. Here we have Jefferson's Rotunda at his house. Okay, at the University of Virginia here, again, gorgeous, very neoclassical in its lines. And of course, the Capitol Rotunda itself, the beautiful and exquisite symmetry that is going to be so much associated with ancient Greek and Rome. Patriotic art. Oh, that was a fast one, wasn't it? We're almost going on 20 minutes. You guys are doing great. Thanks for sticking with me. Patriotic art is going to really create this idea of nationalism and create the myths of our country. And we actually have looked at a couple of artists. Believe it or not, I just haven't talked about them. The first piece we have here, Landing of the Pilgrims, again, an unknown artist. We have by 1830 we are obsessed with this idea of this continent as being only half a civilized when we are going to work towards that. And so there is a real desire in this era to revive the past. And so we have, believe it or not, historical societies being founded. So it's not just Ms. Anderson and myself who are the psychos who are all worried about our ancestry, but we find that genealogical societies actually in the 1820s start to become a popular organization. Biographies of very, very famous Americans like George Washington and Ben Franklin will also be commissioned to be written and create a national folklore, if you will. And pictures of the founding of the colonies and the Revolution will be painted in this particular genre. One of the more favorite topics, of course, is going to be the landing of the Pilgrims, as you see here. And this particular piece is actually in the Capitol Rotunda. And again, artist is unknown, which seems kind of odd for this particular importance. We have seen this one, I believe this is in Garrity, an interesting piece by Emanuel Gottlieb Lutz, 1851. He is an immigrant from Germany and is known primarily for his large historic compositions. And of course, this is probably one of the more famous ones. He was the main person. If you had a big wall that you needed to fill, it was always going to be Emanuel Lutz who was going to do that for you. All right, I'm sure you're all going to kind of freak out about this one because you've never pictured George Washington and his buff chest. I believe, oh, is he got a six-pack there? It looks like. And I do like this particular piece. And we look at this, and believe it or not, this is reminiscent of a very, very old Roman or Greek, I think it's a Roman piece that's called Cincinnatus, and that is with the hand finger pointing up in the air. But it's very interesting to see George Washington wearing a toga. And this particular piece was actually commissioned in honor of the anniversary of George Washington's birth, the 100-year anniversary, because he was born in 1732, and this was ordered in 1832. Believe it or not, I cannot imagine why. When it arrived in the capital, it attracted great controversy. It is modeled after a Greek classical statue of Zeus, so George Washington's Zeus is not working here. And believe it or not, the half-naked picture of George Washington was seen as being a bit offensive for the time period. Some joked actually at the time period that Washington was desperately seeking his clothes, and hence the look on his face and the command that he has given people. The statue itself was relocated to the east lawn of the Capitol in the 1840s, and it finally came into the cold after being outside for several years. It is currently, to my understanding, in the new Museum of History and Technology as part of the Smithsonian. So a piece that you, if you so desire, you can go to Washington, D.C. and visit. Call it Buff Washington. All right, the next piece that we have here is one of, oh, it went too many forward, is one of my favorites. This is a Frederick Church piece called Banner in the Sky. And at some point in the class, I will make you go ahead and watch a video from the Second World War, some propaganda videos, and it uses this particular scene in the background. And from the bottom, you see two lines of American airplanes flying up in a V formation. And V, of course, was the symbol for victory during the course of World War II. And I never knew until I started teaching AP US that this particular painting was very, very old, and it had happened well before World War II. This is a very, very small oil painting that is reproduced and circulated by the thousands to Union soldiers and their families during the First World War. So if you're lucky enough to have one in your house in your possession, good for you. Notice it does have a little bit Hudson River School with a broken off stump, although it's quite big. And the clouds themselves, of course, form the stripes of Old Glory, and the flagpole is the actual stump or tree itself. And notice the idea that there is a combination of nature and God's design have come together to bless the Union here. And again, a really amazing piece. I do enjoy that piece greatly. A couple of the frontier artists, I know this is getting a smidgen long, but we will just want to show you some big overviews here. We are close to being done. The frontier artists in general are going to be looking at those native peoples who are about to disappear. Oftentimes, We see in this particular piece by Charles Berg King, which is called The Noble Savage Image. Again, it's meant to be a series here. He wants to talk about the preconceived notions that American society had about natives in general. And this is the enlightened view, that if you were de Tocqueville or had been an Enlightenment thinker, this is how you would picture them, free from everything. Notice that they look almost like Roman busts in their facial features here and the way that they are facing instead of straight forward. So again, it is the noble savage, if you will. If we move on to another piece that we have here, George Catlin, and for those of you who know Mrs. Catlin, who is a teacher here, and her daughter Anna goes to school here. They are actually related. There is a connection here. And Catlin is going to devote his life to depicting Native American Indians and will create a whole portfolio of the different tribes that he encounters. He views himself as a record-keeping historian rather than an artist, and says at one point, quote, "Nothing short of the loss of my life shall prevent me from visiting their company or visiting their country and becoming their historian." And what was interesting about this, for all the hatred that we appear to see in Jackson and those who follow him about the Native Americans, Catlin's work was gobbled up as fast as possible. Americans simply consumed them. There seemed to be this real interest in Native Americans. And this one is entitled The Stoic Indian. We here see a piece by Carl Bodmer from the 1830s, and this is going to pay quite close attention to the dress, everything from the types of feathers to the tattoos that are on the body. And what's interesting is this particular image in the 1840s, when we are truly working towards manifest destiny, that becomes the image that is solidified in the American mind, and that is of the demonic Indian, he who must be removed because he is walking around with a tomahawk and will kill. And so if we compare that back to the first one, we will see some things changing there. Of course, things do not get better. The Osage scalp dance, of course, shows this horrific image that Americans are going to more or less adopt as they work towards their manifest destiny of the savage Indian who is going to rape and harm innocent women and children. And that is very evident here in John McStanley's piece from the 1840s. Again, kind of going back to the idea of the satanic or the evil savage. And last but not least, this piece that is called The Last of the Race by Tompkins Madison from 1847. Here we see on a cliff an old chief, a younger man, and two women contemplate the ocean. They have been pushed as far west as they possibly can through this idea of manifest destiny. It is the end of the line. There is no more place for them to go. We've moved them past the Appalachians, past the Mississippi, over the Rockies, and now they've reached the end. And this more or less foreshadows what will truly happen to natives as they move in that direction. My little note down here says, look at the dog who's looking up. Even the dog is aware of the way in which things are about to end. So we see here the doomed Indian. This particular sculpture, which we're going to take a peek at momentarily, is the dying Indian chief contemplates the progress of civilization. And it is meant to be an allegory of our history and the struggle between civilized man and the savage, between the cultivated and wild nature. And go back to those first pictures and think about how that was shown with those tiny, tiny people and the beautiful grandeur of nature. And quite honestly, this is the official view, if you will, of the fate of the American Indian, that he will be subservient, that he will be the dying Indian chief, if you will. And that, my friends, is everything. I hope that your vacation is going well and that you enjoyed this 28-minute video. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk more later this week.